Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for Giving Yourself and Others Grace, Lessons from a Lost Mom, presented by Michelle Valiukenas, lost mom and founder of the Colette Louise Tisdahl Foundation. Listen, today's conversation, it's a hard one, and we will all lean in and we'll talk about the loss, the lessons, the trials, the tribulations, and grace. So grab the tissues and give yourself some time, space, and permission to just feel all the feels. So my name is Lynn Poland. I'm the co-founder of Kindred Beginnings, a family building support community offering a safe, brave space for those navigating the journey to be supported, heard, and validated. If you have any questions about our programs or how we can help better support you, please reach out to me or you can visit our website. So please let me officially and formally introduce Michelle Valiukenas. Michelle is the proud mom of her angel sweet pea, who she lost due to miscarriage, her angel daughter, Colette Louise, who she lost at 9 days old, and her only living child, her rainbow baby, Elliot Miguel. Inspired by her journey with Colette, Michelle and her husband founded the Colette Louise Tisdahl Foundation, whose mission is to improve outcomes of pregnancy, childbirth, and prematurity and infancy, as well as aid in the grieving process through financial assistance, education, and advocacy. Their flagship program financially assists families dealing with high risk and complicated pregnancies, NICU stays, and loss. The organization's ability to help families relies on donations and grants, and they are grateful you're able to donate. Michelle also participates and advocates on issues of maternal health, maternal mortality, infant health and safety, and pregnancy complications. Michelle lives in Glenville, Illinois, with her son Elliot, husband Mark, and dog Nemo. Michelle, I laughed when I read Dog Nemo because I was like, Dog Nemo.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So welcome, Michelle. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for being here. And
Yes,
like me
thank
and
you for
so
having
many in
me.
this community, thank you for turning your pain into purpose. We spoke about that before we started recording, and many of us in the space have done just that. And so we're so glad to have you here and to speak with the Kindred Beginnings community today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm always grateful to talk and to share a little bit. And this really required me to think about like what I wanted to say and what I wanted to talk about in my experience. So I have some brief slides that I like to just put together to keep me organized. I can talk about some of this for hours on end, and I want to respect everybody's time. So I did this, but it really focused me on what I wanted to say to you guys. So yeah, so let's dive in. This is my little family. So that's my son, Elliot. That was on his first birthday. He's now 20 months old. And he does smile in pictures. Unfortunately, it's a really good picture, but like he was not a smiley guy that day. He's a very smiley guy normally. And then that's our Cocoa Bear, which represents our daughter, Colette. And then that's my phenomenal husband, Mark. So let me tell you a little bit about my motherhood journey. So this is kind of like all of the journey that got here, right? So like a lot of people listening, if not everybody listening, we dealt with infertility, and we got an unexplained diagnosis, which I think is one of the worst things to receive, is like, hi, yeah, you're infertile. We don't know why, but good luck. And then we did 3 rounds of IUIs, all of which failed. We went to IVF. Ultimately, I've done 3 egg retrievals and 4 rounds of IVF. I got pregnant on our first round of IVF and miscarried, and actually miscarried in 2 separate incidents. So I started bleeding. I went to the doctor. They could see a gestational sac, but no baby. And they told me I miscarried. That was a Friday, and the Friday before Mother's Day, because the universe apparently has like a really good sense of humor. Then they took blood work. I came back on Tuesday and did more blood work, and my numbers actually were rising. I went in for an ultrasound on Wednesday morning, and they found a heartbeat. And then that Wednesday evening, I miscarried again. And so it's 1 miscarriage, but kind of 2 miscarriages in some ways. Or I say part 1 and part 2, but that was my experience. And then I got pregnant with our daughter Colette on our 3rd round of IVF. When I was 21 weeks pregnant, I was hospitalized after a standard OB appointment revealed really high blood pressure. And then I was in the hospital a little over 3 weeks before the doctors recommended delivery. So we did a C-section. Colette was born 24 weeks, 5 days. And a really scary C-section, a really terrible recovery. She went straight to the NICU, and she spent her short life 9 days in the NICU before we lost her. After we lost her and still had no answers as to why, we decided to try naturally for a little while. And then we did one more round of IVF that didn't take. And when my husband was in tears when we found out it didn't take, I sort of had to step back and say, like, I was kind of relieved. I didn't want to be pregnant and I was scared to be pregnant. And so I came to the conclusion. So we used a gestational carrier. I did one more round of one more egg retrieval, so that we had embryos that were good and set and that I felt more confident on. And then we had our rainbow baby in the midst of a global pandemic in July of 2020, and that's our little guy there. So that's my motherhood journey, right? And so like that's a lot of stuff that happened just to get here. But so I talk a lot about, and I use the term lost mom, and I don't know where I came up with it or when I started doing this, but I've used it for several years or a few years. I was actually on a friend's podcast and she said, let's talk some language. And she said, why do you call yourself a lost mom? And it was one of those moments that sort of just like I paused and I was like, oh, why do I? And I think, it's just anyone who's sort of in this space has had a series of losses, right? And it's whether it's one loss, it's, 10 losses, whether it's, getting to miscarriage, whether it's just not being able to get pregnant, whether it's, anything, like all of the stuff, they're all losses. So I like to think of all of us as lost, moms, dads, if you're listening. And that was kind of my thing. So these are some of the things I came up with. So and I'm actually going to move this a little bit just so I can say. So infertility, loss of control, loss of carrying. I didn't get to carry my son who's here. Labor. I've never been in labor, and I will never be in labor because of the incision that they did. If I went into labor, my uterus could burst. Loss of innocence. Parenting in a normal way, right? Like I don't know what it's like to parent without knowing loss. Breastfeeding. I didn't get to breastfeed a child really. I did induce lactation with my son, and he did take a little bit, but not very much. And so I didn't have that experience. COVID, oh my God, are we all just like dealing with that, right? And what does that look like? I don't know what it's like to parent not in COVID. And so all of those kinds of things, right? And then the major things people think about, right? Colette and our sweet pea and our miscarriage. But there's all these other things that come with it. And in fact, Lynn and I were talking when we first got on, and we were talking about things. And for me, one thing that I have definitely noted as a secondary loss is I used to be really religious, and I'm really angry at God. And like, my party line when I first lost was God and I weren't on speaking terms. But that's kind of stayed through. And that used to be a really big source of comfort and understanding and all of that for me. And so that's a loss too. And then, loss of friends and those kinds of things as well.
Michelle, can you go back to that slide for a second?
Yeah.
I just think that this is so powerful because a loss is a loss is a loss. And thank you for speaking to whether it's just you're grieving that you have not been able to get pregnant, or the chemical pregnancy, which I loathe that term, but that's the
right.
term that's used. The miscarriage, no matter what kind of loss, the loss of carrying, a loss is a loss is a loss, and we're all valid in our feelings and the hard feelings that surround it. But what I love about this is I'm just such a visual person, is that when we think of lost mom, we truly just think about the loss of either carrying like a pregnancy or a baby. But when you put it out there like this, like the loss of going into labor, the loss of breastfeeding, the loss of control, it just makes it so much more, it's so much bigger than I think what people see on the surface, like a lost mom. There's so many layers to it. And I think that this is a great representation of that. So thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I put this together, but even as I was talking through it a little bit, I was like, oh yeah. And then what about that loss? I didn't include that. And and I think that that's all part of the thing. I will say, like, one thing is I am just a little less than a month away from turning 40. Right. And so I have a 20-month-old, and we are talking about and figuring out if we're going to have a third child. Did I ever think that at 40 I would be thinking about bringing home another child? No, I thought I'd be in like the throes of parenting. And it's like I am a little bit, albeit different because it's in COVID and all of that. But it any of these things worked out throughout, I would have been in a different place in a different parenting stage. And that's a loss, right? And, again, if you compared losses, that's not as big of a loss as the death of my daughter or my miscarriage or anything like that. But that is a loss. And that's, so the view of what we thought our families would look like or the timing of things, those are losses as well. Yeah, so I really like this little graphic. So it's like this brilliant artist that I cannot, her name is now escaping me, but I will get the name to Lynn to do this. But I like this idea of, and this is kind of like my approach, is joy and grief holding hands and going through things together. And I think that's really powerful and it's really helpful for me. Parenting after loss. My son is incredible, right? And like I know every parent says this that that their child is so special, but I'm telling you, like all the other parents are wrong and I'm right, and my son is amazing, right? And there is so much joy in that, and yet there's so much grief because I look at him and I think of how different he would be if his older sister was here. Um, and I know that there's grief and I know that there's loss in that. And so I like this idea of just instead of what we tend to think of as like you're either really happy or you're sad. And I'm like, nope. This is pretty much my permanent status, right? Is being a little bit of both. And that's okay. And not only is it okay, it makes sense. And, I think we really need to embrace it. So I like this little thing. And that's kind of my approach. So I started really talking about this idea of, I'm going to go back, grace, right? And we will say this. I kept hearing this throughout the loss community. I found myself saying this to other people, it's like, give yourself some grace, all that. And one day, I don't know, it was kind of just like alone in my thoughts. And I started saying, what does that mean? Why do we keep saying that to each other? And what does that mean? And I really was bothered by it all of a sudden, something that I had been using and saying without really even thinking about it. And so then I started thinking what does grace mean? And so I liked the idea of using grace as sort of an acronym of some things. And I came up with an acronym of what I thought grace sort of felt like in doing this. And so, grace. So granting the permission to feel what you're feeling, right? There's so many times where people are putting these things on it. I remember in infertility, people telling me oh, but enjoy, not having kids yet. You'll see once it happens, you won't have any time. Enjoy the time you have together. And yeah, we did. And that was nice, but that's not what we wanted. And we were allowed to mourn those things. And yes, we had more time and we did travel and we did all of those things. But we didn't want to, right? We would go on trips and we'd go on vacations and think we would like nothing more than to not be able to go because we had a child at home, or for it to be a very different vacation because we had a child. And so, I usually say, kind of ignore those people and feel what you're going to feel and grant yourself that permission and know that it's okay. And on the other side, know that it's okay to take the breaks and to enjoy what it is at that moment and not to really feel like that. I think particularly I found in the sort of infertility world is, right, it's okay, this cycle didn't happen. And it's okay, now get right back on the horse for the next cycle. And there's a lot of pressure and sort of assumptions on that. And you may not be there, and that's okay. You can take those breaks, you can pause, give yourself those seconds to do that. And then resting and taking care of yourself. And that kind of goes to what I just finished saying with, the permission is it's not easy. It's exhausting. I will tell you, grief is what exhausts me. And that is all those losses that we said. I mean, that's a lot to carry with us all the time, and to be in these positions where the losses accumulate on top of each other, right? One thing I didn't really talk too much about, but I've lost some friends along the way, right? People who just didn't know how to show up for me, didn't know how to um, didn't know how to handle it, and either kind of themselves sort of like, easily, kind of backed out of the room quietly and left the friendship, and people that I had to like proactively say, you know what, this is not going to work for me and my family, and that's a loss, and those are losses to carry. They're all heavy, so take that time. Adapt. So I decided I hate the word pivot after all of this COVID and talking a lot about pivot. So I like the idea of adapting instead. And it's just what you need now, right? Like there are moments that are great and are wonderful, even in loss and grief. And go with them and lean into them and do that. And then there are days where getting out of bed is going to be hard, and adapt and give yourself that permission and that ability to do that. Create your own toolbox. I really love this idea because I think this is saying like, it's all the things, right? It's saying this is where I'm going to counseling. This is when I'm going to a support group. These are the friends that like get my mind off of it or allow me to talk about it. All of those kinds of things. This is what I do when I have a really crappy day, right? One of the things that I always knew, and my sister was amazing in doing this, was when I had anything failed and with infertility, is that we made a sister sushi date because I wasn't pregnant, right? And so we would do these things. And so it would be like, okay, sister sushi date. And we did that. And that was part of my toolbox, was like, when it was crappy, I knew I had a sister sushi date to look forward to, right? And those are all those things. And so it's really just having the toolbox. No one thing is going to make things better or more manageable, but it's looking at and having that toolbox to say like, okay, this is not working today, but what about this? And those are, that kind of thing. And then E, I'm like, enjoy the moments you can without guilt. When when Colette died, we really just, my husband and I just kind of like walked through life where it sort of felt like we were underwater and doing things. And there was one night that we just went out to dinner and we had a really good dinner, and we were laughing and we were having a good time. And I remember coming home and crying because it felt so wrong to be having that moment. And, in the time since, I'm almost 4 years out from Colette's loss, then I have had a chance to really realize like those moments are really, really important. And there shouldn't be moments that we feel guilty about.
Michelle, I love this so much because this whole acronym goes back to the slide before with the permission of the and between the joy and the grief,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And I frequently say like grief is like a pinball machine. One moment you're sad, one moment you're okay, you're in an acceptance, you're in denial, you're bargaining, you're back to being sad, you're back to being acceptance again. And it's just like boop, 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 boop.
Right.
And so really when you're looking at this acronym, adapting to what you need now, it's being present and being curious. Where am I right now? What is it that I need from my toolbox right now, right? Do I need to rest? Do I need, and sister sushi date? I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And so great. Those are always like a great, kind of like tool and things that we use. So, okay. So I want to go a little bit more into like how I use this and how I see about this for myself. So I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but this is GRACE essentially. And so, I think for the first one, knowing that it's always going to be there. We had, so I have really good family friends. I actually was a flower girl in their wedding. And when I was about 18, they had twins. One was born sleeping. And I remember that I was old enough, and I remember going to the memorial, and I remember things, and they've always included Nicholas as part of their family. And I remember all of that. And we were probably 1.5 years out, and I actually talked to Dad, and he said to me, he was 21 years out at the time when we talked. And he said, sometimes he said, on the way to work, I start crying the same way that I did in, the immediacy after it. He's like, sometimes it just hits me full force. And I remember thinking, at that moment, I had thought that at some point I would just like go back to normal, right? I would, that would just like, it would go away. It was a season. It was like a thing that passed and did this. And I remember being like, oh my God, it's 21 years later. Wow. And then also feeling very freed by that, was like, this is just going to be like my little friend grief that comes along with me. And that's okay. And so for me, that just like really allowed me to, you know, fall into this of like giving myself this permission that everything was, that this was going to happen, and allowing myself to do that. I talked about this before, but I think grief and loss and infertility and parenting and parenting in COVID and parenting after loss and all of that, all of those things individually are exhausting in and of themselves. When you add them all together, it's amazing that we even get out of bed. Like, we are all so tired about doing this. And so I do really try to, and I'm not very good about taking care of myself, right? And I think, most women aren't, most moms aren't, most people aren't. And I really try to give myself those permissions to rest and to just say, like, I am done today. And that is all I'm going to do. And this is what I'm going to do. So adapting, I look at the work I do with Colette's Foundation, that I do full time. I look at it as parenting Colette. And it's not at all the way I want it. It's not at all the way I expected to. If you had gone back in time and told me any of this, I would have looked at you like you were crazy. But I'm doing that, and I'm working with that. And that morphs and changes constantly. For my toolbox, I really rely on, I do weekly therapy with my therapist, who's amazing. And I have even done twice a week. My husband and I do couples counseling every other week. That's something that we started after a miscarriage, and our miscarriage took a real hit on our marriage. And I knew that. And that's why I said, let's go to counseling. And we continued that. And that work was really valuable. And I think had we not done that work after losing Sweet Pea, I don't know that we would have made it after losing Colette. And that is something that I don't say easily, and that I don't think a lot of people from the outside would think that. But these are tough things. And so for me, that's really important. And that is a priority that we have made. I also belong to a support group, and I surround myself by fellow lost parents, and that's everything, right? So every one of those losses, those are my friends. Those are the people I turn to, right? I have a Facebook chat that is always around with 3 other lost moms. And so whenever I have an issue in parenting, right, when it's like, right now my son is 20 months old and he's not very verbal. And when I have those moments of freaking out, like, what does this mean? What does it mean? And I'm going down that, I pop in a message to them to say, like, I'm really freaking out and I don't know what to do with this. And I know that I'm instantly going to get back a bunch of things of like, it's okay, and you're not, and it's fine. And it's not going to be judgy, and it's not going to be trying to fix it or anything like that. It's just going to be supportive. And so that's really important to me. And then with, no, what was E? Anyways, but I don't let little things bother me. That's really something that I have changed. I am not the mom that I would have been for a variety of reasons. The biggest of which is like, I love that my son is really rambunctious and gets into trouble and, climbs things that he's not supposed to and makes messes and all of that. I think that's really important about growth. That's not something I would have done earlier. And so that's really just, learning from that and doing that. And I remember that he is amazing and he's wonderful. And I take stock in that, and I really, try to enjoy those moments and enjoy the messes and the craziness and the fact that sometimes he is covered in food and he enjoys eating, and sometimes comes up and then all of a sudden I might have a nice shirt on and all of a sudden I've got, 2 handprints of applesauce on me. And I remember and I think, God, I fought so long to get to this point. And so I really just enjoy those moments, and I really just let those things go. And I think that's really important.
Michelle, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How did your personal strategy, your Grace personal strategy, look different between Colette and your rainbow baby Elliot? Because
Yeah.
it looked different, because then you
Yep.
didn't have applesauce stains on your shirt,
Right.
and you right.
Right.
So how was it different, and how did you navigate that
Yeah.
part?
Yeah. No, great question. Um, So I really poured a lot of my emotions and my grief into setting up and running the foundation. And that was something that, was my coping strategy. And that was where I put all of my emotion in. So just to give you a sense of like, it almost became an obsession for me in some ways. Colette died May 31st of 2018, and we launched the foundation September 7th, so on her due date. And that's not to say that we launched it as like a full complete like what it is today, but we launched it, and that was really, really, for me, I needed that. Like I needed to redefine that date. I needed to have this thing in place, and so it became sort of an obsession to me, and that was really what I sort of focused in on more. I also kept myself busy, right? I learned, a lot about myself, and I, did different volunteer opportunities. I, took classes. I went to, seminars. I did all this stuff. So I really just took care of myself and did things that, um, had I had a newborn at home, I wouldn't have been able to do. And really tried to, as much as possible, appreciate the sort of extra me time. And I know that that sounds so weird to say, um, in laws, but to do that. Um, and and I think I just spent a lot of time figuring out what was coming next, and having the days, and like that time period, there were days where getting out of bed was like the major accomplishment, and that was what I was going to have to go with. And so I think adapting to those kinds of things, um, you know, uh, therapy. I mean, I already had anxiety long before all of this. And what are all of these different losses at? I mean, talk about triggering anxiety, right? And so coping with that and figuring out what that was going to look like and what that was going to be, taking the time of really, I talked a lot about Colette from the very beginning, and learned people were going to have to just adjust if they were going to be in our lives. And a lot of people, I will give a lot of credit to a lot of people who were kind of uncomfortable at the beginning, and they just sort of morphed into it. And really getting to do all of that. So that was a lot of the stuff that I would do. I slept a lot. I will tell you that much. I always remember when I went to see my therapist, and I don't remember the timing now, it was probably within the week after Colette died. She said, "Well, you look better rested than I would have thought." And I said to her, "I sleep a lot because when I sleep, I don't have to deal with the fact that my daughter's not here, that I don't have a child at home, that I don't have anything like this. And so I can just sort of hide." And so I did that kind of stuff too. And, really just, it was about survival. And I think that that's some of the stuff too, is like, right, we can even talk about all these great strategies, but sometimes it's just surviving the day or the moment or the event or the month or whatever it may be. And that's okay too. Is like, if it's just, sometimes I'll see like those memes on social media that are like, if all you did today was make it through, like you did enough. And sometimes like we do need to really just say that to ourselves and to do that.
It's so true. I I've had a difficult month, and I have a sticky note above my vision board, and it says 5 things. It says breathe, eat, and in parentheses something, move your body, drink water, and sleep as much as you can.
Yeah.
And they're like basic needs, but if that's all that happens, then that is enough. And sometimes good enough is enough.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Definitely. Okay. So this is our first Christmas. And there's Nemo. See, I needed Nemo to make an appearance. And so Do I always succeed at this? Hell no. Okay. We are here on Tuesday, Saturday night. I had a crazy breakdown of everything, right? And what triggered the whole thing and set everything off was that I was trying to put together waffle batter to make a waffle for my son's dinner, and he came up, he was exploring, he came up to our kitchen island and he went boom, and like the batter went everywhere and it was a big mess and all that. That really triggered everything to like just fall apart from there. So no, I am not by any stretch of imagination following this and succeeding at this all the time. And that's okay. So, I go to this emergency help, and that's why I like the toolbox idea is, what is it that you can do in your toolbox? So what did I do Saturday night? I got upset, and then I realized I had to remove myself from the situation. And so my husband had my son, and I went upstairs and I like sat upstairs and I cried, and I did a little bit of screaming, and allowed myself to feel this. And I did all of that. And then I came back downstairs and I apologized to my husband, who I started screaming at, even though it had nothing to do with him. But I had apologized to him, and, I enjoyed it, and we got through dinner and we got through bedtime, and then I cried some more. And then, we had a dinner that was not like anything healthy. I don't even remember now what I'm trying to think of what we ate, but we ate like an unhealthy dinner that felt really good. And we watched stupid TV, and I got some sleep. I got to sleep at a decent time. I got to sleep in on Sunday. And I did sleep in on Sunday, which is something that was really great. And I got through it. And so those are the things that we have to do. And really it's that toolbox, right? So that takes that kind of time where it's like, I need to get out of this house. And that was something, in a COVID world where we're trying to keep our son safe, when he can't get vaccinated yet and he can't wear a mask yet. We are home a lot, and it is easy to be at home and to just stay there. And so now, since then, I get out of the house every day, and I've done that since Saturday. Now it's not that many days, but it's a really like I can see the difference and feeling that. And that was something that, I've now added to my toolbox. It's like every day I have to leave the house, and those kinds of things. So, but these are some of the things I've done, and those are the things you have in your toolbox to do. I will have another one of those breakdowns, right? Where like all of a sudden everything does, everything piles on top of each other. And all of a sudden, like, the one little thing that sort of sets us off. And that's okay. Right. And knowing some of those things, I know the times of year there are triggers. So our miscarriage, my hospitalization with Colette's birth, and Colette's death all happened within the month of May. Okay. So I hate the month of May. And so when I start getting to the end of April, I'm like, all right, I just got to like dig in, and I just have to get through these 31 days. And so I give myself a lot more permission and a lot more relaxation. I try to take off a lot of things that are like hanging on my plate in May. I try to take them off in advance, so that I have an easier month and I'm not, putting a bunch of additional stress on myself. To the extent I can avoid those. I can't avoid all of them. And so there are things I have to do, and I realize that, and I take more care for myself and more rest and, all of those things. And I reinforce my toolbox. It's not uncommon in May for it to be a twice a week therapy session, or to need those things of like, I got to do something to take my mind off of this. What am I doing? And so those are the things that I think are really helpful to do.
I think that's a really important point. If we know that we're going to have a hard week, a hard month, a hard 2 months, to prepare for that.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of shying away from it, lean into it. What can I do to get ready and to plan for those hard moments? What can I do for myself?
Yeah, exactly. And I find that, you know, a lot of times when you're planning ahead and you sort of have a plan in case everything feels awful in that time period, usually it's not as awful as we think, right? Because we're kind of preparing ourselves for that time, and to do that. That's not saying that like, oh, if you prepare, it won't be bad. It'll be bad, but sometimes it's not as bad as we could imagine. And that's really important.
Great point.
So,
Thank you.
and then I said giving others grace. And so I will tell you, originally when I said this as like the topic idea and told this to Lynn, I was thinking about like other lost, you know, parents and things like that. And as I started thinking more about it, I was like, you know what? No, I want to give others who don't say the right thing, who say really dumb things, the chance to say we're going to give them some grace, right? And we're going to protect ourselves, but we're going to give them some grace, and we're going to give ourselves some grace in that. And so that's kind of where I looked at it. So these are the people, right, from infertility who tell you things like, oh, if you just relax, or just adopt, or just go on vacation, you know, all of those kinds of things, all the way through to like, enjoy that you have a child at home. You know, all of those kinds of things that people say that are really dumb and really hurtful. Those are the people you have to like be prepared for. Those are like, I kind of call them my like landmines, right? So
I
those
call
are
them innocent, ignorant
yeah.
statements. And Dr. Anna Flores Locke, she calls them microaggressions.
Mhm. They really are.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think of like, for example, I had probably like a year out from Colette, my C-section scar got infected. And so I had to go back to my OB, and I love my OB and everything. And so when I was in the, you know, went to go check in with the receptionist was like, oh, I remember for you from when you came for your pregnancy appointments. How's the baby? And it's like, and so those are the moments that you have to sort of like, and I've tried to avoid them. I think every once in a while I'm like, oh, I've gotten to this point where I'm not going to have any of those anymore. And then it happens, right? So that's what kind of like I came up with the GRACE acronym again, but really based on like how we're taking and approaching those people. So gather your people, those people who understand, right? So I know, I referenced before the, you know, Facebook chat message that I have with lost moms. And that is, you know, been everything from one of my friends in that group is, you know, had an experience where she is carrying a bit more weight in her stomach these days, and that a pediatric dentist, like, you know, tapped on her stomach and said, oh, is there a baby brother or sister like to her child, right? And she's not, and she had just actually recently miscarried, right? And so I don't know why people say this, but you want the people that when you have that experience, you can step back from it afterwards, after you handle it, and you can just say to people like, this was a really shitty situation to be in. And I want these people to just like get it immediately, not for me to have to explain why that was bad, anything, like people who just get it, right? And so I always say like, gather your people, just have that, you know, that kind of thing. The person that you know, you can immediately text message to say like, I cannot believe how ignorant so-and-so was, or anything like that. All of those kinds of things. So I think that that's really important. I do think sometimes, and I will say that this one is something I'm not very good about doing this. It's like, you don't know what everyone's story is. So, and I really came to that conclusion largely, probably a couple of years ago now. But my grandmother, just recently died, but she had dementia in her last couple of years. And she had said a couple things to me, you know, basically like, well, I mean, Colette died, now move on. And it irritated me. But as she started down the dementia road, what we came to find out was that she was reliving, she had had a loss that I had never known about. My mom, who's her caretaker, had heard one time about this loss, and she actually had these moments where she was reliving her loss and she was screaming for her baby. And we don't know a ton of information. We found out a little bit since. One of her best friends filled my mom in a little bit. But sometimes like that, at that time, you know, what she did was she compartmentalized it and just moved on. And so sometimes people like think from those angles of like that's what they did or that's what they were supposed to do. And so they think that that's helpful. Uh, I use my grandmother as an example of like that conclusion of coming from that, but also of like none of this loss and grief ever goes away, right? And so what had happened in my grandmother's case was that clearly she had never dealt with it. And so as she was losing it, she still had this all buried. And nobody could help her really because we didn't know enough about what had happened. And so I love using that as an example to show like, you know, I didn't know that. And like, once I learned that, I was like, I felt like I understood my grandmother so much better, like throughout her, entire life and my entire life. So just to remember that and to do that, so much easier to say that and than in the moment, but just kind of like, just trying to remember those things and move on. Um, I think except some people are not going to be in your life anymore. It is really hard to say that. And it's really hard for me as I'm thinking this and I'm like counting up people on my, fingers of like people who I just don't, either are not in my life at all, that I keep at a distance, or that I've just changed my relationship with. And that's really, really hard, right? And that's something we just have to like accept as this is part of the whole journey, right? So people who destroy you regularly with their comments probably don't need to be in your life. They just don't, you know? And that's not an easy say. Like I said, it's sort of like as if it's not easy, but sometimes that's just what you have to do to protect yourself. And that's, something to do. I like creating wording in advance of knowing what you're going to say. So, I think this is always a big thing, right? Like I know when we were trying and when we had miscarried and not everybody knew about our miscarriage, I would get a lot of things, right? Like we had been married a little while. Oh, when are you going to have a baby? Or, oh, it's time, or you're not getting any younger. All those things. And so I finally started to develop some language ahead of time, right? Of saying like, oh, we're trying hopefully soon, or saying stuff of like, we're just, when it happens, and really just trying to get those languages in place to say those things that like that was what you're going to say and that's what you're going to repeat if you needed to, and that was what you're going to do. And so I think, just being prepared is always helpful. Yeah,
I call that scripting, by the way, Michelle.
Yeah, exactly.
And to practice it, right? You're not gonna, you know what your big triggers are, but to actually write out and then practice speaking it in front of a mirror so you can see yourself, hear yourself, and rehearse it. So in the moment when that trigger happens, you're as ready as you're ever going to be.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I think, and also like knowing and expecting what people are going to say in response. I have been to places where I say something about, oh, and I have an angel baby. And people sort of get like, oh my God, she's going to talk about this. And it's like, okay. But I know that that's going to be some reactions to people, and that's okay.
That's their stuff. That's because they're
exactly
uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to say what's comfortable for me. And if they're not comfortable with it, well, okay. I'm not really comfortable with the fact that I have to talk about that, my daughter is dead, and I don't really like doing that. And so it's just temporary. And then educate others, about your experiences. And so these are, this is a couple of ways that I think you can do this. I think you can be very honest with those people close to you about what you want to label your losses as well as whether you want to tell them about all of your losses or not. And you can be very detailed and you can explain in different levels of, it's not just this, right? Like, it's not like you might look at it and say it's this one thing. And so sort of looking back to that, like all those bubbles of like, you might think that it's only this one thing, but the thing is, there's all these other losses that result from it. And, you can be very honest and open with people about that. And I think that that's really important. And I think we learn so much when we hear that and we share that and we develop those kinds of things. You can also do what I am notorious for doing, which is saying really like like straight to the point, very like honest kinds of things. And so I, the summer after Colette died, I ran around and went to all sorts of doctors and did all sorts of things because I was determined to find the reason why, right? Why this happened, what was wrong with me, and what we're going to do. And that was my determination. Still didn't find an answer, still don't know an answer. So just, but that was my obsession. So I guess that was one of the questions that you asked about, like what I did in between Colette and Ellie, and I guess I did some of that too. And I was at an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and the medical assistant checked me in and then said, oh, she's probably gonna want to look up, and they have like this contraption that goes up your nose for them to look at. And she's like, so let me set that up. And she's setting it up, and she looks, and attached to my medical file is Colette. And she says, oh, you have a baby girl at home. And so, you know, again, it's one of these things that like, no matter how much you prepare yourself for, you're always going to have those ones that just like drop a bomb in the middle of everything. And my immediate reaction was, she's dead. That's exactly what I said. And so this poor woman like looked at me wide-eyed, and literally, I've never seen this actually happen except in TVs and movies. She actually backed out of the room, like slowly, and left. And I felt terrible when I said it like that. And I text messaged my husband and I said, I am terrible. I'm a terrible person because this is what I did. And his response was really good. And I actually always liked it. He said, yeah, but that woman will never make that mistake with another mom. And I remember that, and I hold that through, right? So like, it was very blunt. It wasn't something formal, but I educated her a little bit about an experience and said, you can't do this. And yes, would I have liked to have done it in a more professional, in a more kind way? Yes, I didn't though. And so, but I educated her. And so that's also something else too, is to educate people. And if we're all sort of educating people, maybe we stop some of these ignorant comments and thoughts and takes on things. So I have a little bit about like the foundation, but I wanted to also just stop and see if you had any questions or if there's anything in the chat. You're on mute.
I saw that. Thank you. There's nothing. You think I would have that figured out by now. There's nothing in the chat, but if anybody would like to put anything in the chat or unmute, you may. And then again, if not, after the recording, we can speak openly and freely too, and that's okay as well. So Michelle, why don't you share a little bit about how people can find you? And of course, you know, all of Michelle's information, it's going to be emailed out to everybody. It's also up on our resources page. So if you're watching this not in real time, you'll be able to find Michelle's information on our resources page on our website. But Michelle, tell us how people can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So hold on. I just want to tell you like a little bit about what we've done since. So we have helped over 1,000 families in 44 states, and we're actually really close to 1 million of grants we've given to families, and over 3,000 clients, so family members and everything that we've done. And that's been really just, you know, to me, that's amazing. I mean, these are the things that I think of as like, that means 1,000 families have heard Colette's name and know Colette's name. And that really means a lot. So that's something we did. Where can you find us? So we are on all the social medias. I have my email there. I have our website. I always have to hit up for donations, so do not feel like I'm only doing this for donations, but that is part of my job. And you can follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. And you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. That is a bi-weekly newsletter. I share a lot about different resources, updates about what we're doing. And yeah, you can find us. And then I have all of our, like, these are our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, like, what are they called? The
handles.
Handles. Thank you. It was like the, you know, the @ things. So But yeah.
And you're also doing a grand challenge, right? To get to 1,000
Yes.
newsletter subscribers for the Colette Gazette. And so I'll have that linked up too.
Yep.
And tell us about that. The 1,000th newsletter subscriber gets to choose what?
Right. So we did this as a two-parter. One part has already been done when we hit 1,000 families. For our 1,000th family, the hospital that they were from or associated with got $1,000 donation personally from my husband and I, not from the foundation. And that was Duke. And so Duke's social workers asked for gas gift cards that they could just give to clients who are in the NICU and like needed to commute and all of that. And so we did that. And so the second part is we are working on by the end of 2022 is to get to 1,000 newsletter subscribers, and the 1,000th newsletter subscriber would get to choose a hospital, either maternity ward or NICU ward, to donate $1,000 to. So yeah, so it's kind of a nice little perk to sign up for a newsletter that is sent out every 2 weeks and has some really great information in. So,
thank you, Michelle, so much for honoring your truth, sharing your story with us, and being so vulnerable and authentic. We truly appreciate you being here and offering some really wonderful nuggets with that, Grace. I love those Grace acronyms. So thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you.